Welcome back to Stormy Tells Ghost Stories Haunted Edinburgh on my Girls Rock Productions channel. In this week's video, I will talk about the infamous Mary King's Close, the Scotsman Hotel, and Banshee Labyrinth. I'm going to start with the underground city of Edinburgh, Mary King's Close. Sorry about missing last week. I do want to start off with that apology. I had some personal things going on, so I needed to take a personal week. I do have both last week's video and this week's video that I will be doing. This first video would have been last week's video, and I will be releasing this week's video tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern. So now I'm going to continue on by talking about Mary King's Close. Lying deep beneath the streets of Edinburgh's Old Town is a dark maze of closes known as Mary King's Close. It's named for the 17th century Edinburgh merchant who was a resident of the close, Mary King. At the time, all the closes had their own names. Some were named after the profession that was located inside the close, such as Fish Market Close or Advocates Close. At first, Mary King's Close was named King's Close or Alexander King's Close. Now, Mary wasn't actually related to Alexander, who was a prominent lawyer until his death in 1619. Mary was a widowed fabric merchant who also sewed for a living. After her husband died in 1629, she and her 4 children moved into the close. Here, she rented a so-called turnpike house with a cellar. She also rented a shop on High Street. As a widow, she had to work very hard, but according to discovered papers, she led a fairly comfortable life. When she died in 1644, her will was written up in a book, which was found many years later, and she had the close named after her. Mary King's Close consists of several underground closes that would have originally been very narrow walkways with dwellings on either side, sometimes rising to 7 stories tall. People lived and worked here, the poor residents living on the bottom floor and wealthier living on the top floors. Some very notable people in history would also stay in Mary King's Close. Sir Simon Preston, the Lord Provost of Craigmillar Castle, owned a house in Mary King's Close in the 16th century. He was one of the last people to have sympathy for the then fallen Queen, Mary. Mary, Queen of Scots, spent her last night in Edinburgh in Mary King's Close in 1567. She had just lost the Battle of Carberry Hill. This was not a real battle, but a series of negotiations which she failed. Her every move was watched by guards, so it wasn't a pleasant stay. She feared for her life because almost everyone wanted her dead. After that, she was taken to prison in Loch Leven Castle. With no sewage system in Edinburgh in the 17th century, people would have to go and do their business in a bucket, one for each household. At a specific time each day, people would listen for the cry of "Gardealoo," which would signal to the residents that it's time to throw the waste in the buckets into the streets to be collected. If you ever tour Mary King's Close, you'll notice that each side of the road has a channel for the waste to run down the street towards what was then known as Nor Loch, a heavily polluted lake located where the Princess Street Gardens now stand. You can only imagine the smell and disease having this rotting excrement so close to the homes would cause. This was one of the reasons why in the mid-1600s the plague ravaged Edinburgh, particularly Mary King's Close. Contrary to popular belief, the close was not sealed off with plague victims inside in 1645. Those healthy enough that wanted to move were relocated to Burgmuir. The people who chose to stay during the outbreak continued to go on about their lives and run their businesses. Anyone suffering from the plague would hang white flags outside their homes, which would signal they needed food and coal, which would be delivered by council workers and volunteers. The plague doctor, George Ray, would visit the close during wearing his bizarre crow-beaked mask, dressed head to toe in leather. The mask had a purpose, as at the end of the beak, Ray would add strong-smelling herbs and flowers, which were believed to stop the airborne miasmas, which were thought to be what was carrying the plague. However, the disease-ridden fleas were to blame, and the leather is actually what would stop them from biting his skin. To save plague victims, Ray would slice open the boils, letting the pus drain away. Then he would cauterize the wound with a red-hot poker. Whilst horrific, the technique went on to save many lives. Along with other plague doctors, Ray was promised a financial reward for conducting such dangerous work by the city council. However, not believing they'd survive, their hands were left in their pockets when it came time to reward Ray. It's believed that Ray lived out his days, never having been fully compensated for his heroic efforts. Due to the building of the Royal Exchange in the 18th century, part of the close was demolished and buried. Later, it was completely closed off to the public, with only a few small businesses still operating, one of which was the Cheney family's saw business, which was in operation right up until 1902. Once they left, it was sealed and forgotten for years, until it was rediscovered during the roadworks above, when workers punched through the road into the sealed close below. Mary King's Close was then used as a bomb shelter during World War II, laying relatively unused again all the way up until the 1990s, when it was reopened as the tourist attraction you see today. Now, there are many ghosts still residing inside Mary King's Close. Thomas Coulthard, a well-respected lawyer, and his wife moved into the close in 1685. Their maidservant fled the place almost immediately, claiming the house was haunted. Later, Coulthard and his wife saw a man's disembodied head floating through the house. Miss Coulthard fainted after seeing this, and the apparition disappeared shortly after that. It returned back after supper with a child spirit and a severed arm, which beckoned them. But that wasn't all. A ghostly dog appeared, running through the living room, followed by the spirit of a cat, and the whole room filled with weird little creatures, who they claimed danced around prettily. A deep and dreadful groan filled the room, and the ghosts and ghouls disappeared. The dog would also appear on later accounts. It would curl up on a chair. Another ghost at the close is believed to be the ghost of its last resident, Andrew Chesney. He was forced to leave the close in 1902 out of the compulsory purchase. Andrew was especially proud of his thunderbox, also known as his toilet. He would leave the door open and he would wave at passers while he was doing his business. His spirit is seen as a worried-looking man wandering through the alleys. A woman in a black dress is also seen on frequent basis. She is believed to be the spirit of Mary King herself. Scratching sounds are heard inside the chimney where a child sweeper supposedly died. People who were brave enough to have put their hands inside the chimney have gotten scratched. Footsteps and voices are heard throughout the entire close. Sometimes an occasional stone is thrown, and then, of course, there is Annie. In 1992, a Japanese medium called Eiko Gibo visited Mary King's Close. When the tour guide entered a particular room, she pulled back, claiming she couldn't enter because it was too strong. Later, she claimed having a heavy feeling of dread and someone tugging on her pants. She later returned alone to figure out what had caused this. Eiko found the spirit of a little girl crying in the corner of the room. She told Eiko she couldn't find her family, and it made her very sad. This girl looked about 9 years old and was probably infected by the plague and abandoned by her family in fear of contamination. She told Eiko that she was also sad because she lost her beloved doll. Eiko bought the spirit, who is now named Annie, a doll, and left it in her room. Many others followed her example, and now Annie's room is stuffed with dolls, puppets, and stuffed animals from all over the world. The atmosphere in the room has changed immediately, and Annie promised not to bother anyone anymore, as long as she got to keep her doll. Once a year, all the other puppets, dolls, and toys are donated to the Sick Kids Friends Foundation, all except for the original doll. Recently, the original doll, nicknamed Tartan Barbie, given to Annie by Aiko, was taken from Annie's room. A search was organized through social media under the hashtag #BringBackTheDoll. We can only hope Annie will get the doll back soon. Now, the next haunted location I'm going to talk about is a hotel that used to house the Scotsman newspaper, the Scotsman Hotel. The Scotsman Hotel opened in 2001 inside the Edwardian building, which means it was built in 1905, which housed the Scotsman newspaper for nearly a century. The hotel is located on North Bridge Street between the Royal Mile and Princess Street, straddling Edinburgh's Old Town and Georgian New Town. In the 1900s, the North Bridge running between New and Old Towns of Edinburgh was widened, and as part of this expansion, a 190-foot-high tower was built, into which the Scotsman newspaper moved their offices. The building, designed by Dunn & Finlay, cost about £500,000, and after the rest of the North Bridge extension was completed and teamed with the Carlton directly opposite, it formed an imposing entrance to Old Town. The direct access from Market Street to the building was an ideal distribution outlet for the newspapers to be packed directly onto the trains at Edinburgh Waverley Railway Station, straight from the newsprinting house that took up the entire basement. The middle floors of the building were originally used for the editorial offices. The current penthouse used to be the pigeon lofts. The site, now occupied by the North Bridge Brasserie, originally held the reception and trading rooms where bartering over advertising took place. In 2001, the newspaper moved to their own purpose-built offices on Holy Road, and the building was renovated into the Scotsman Hotel. In 2017, the hotel once again came under Scottish ownership when it was purchased by the G1 Group, one of the country's largest hospitality groups. Now, the company's flagship venue, the hotel has spent several years going through substantial refurbishment, which has seen all bedrooms upgraded and a boutique cinema added. Additionally, the Grand Cafe now occupies the former advertising offices of the building and serves brunch, afternoon tea, and dinner to a soundtrack of live piano and jazz. From its time at the heart of Edinburgh's news industry, the building is home to several ghosts of those that used to work there. A former printer at the Evening News is one of the most prominent ghosts at the Scotsman Hotel. He continues to work hard even after death. His apparition has been seen countless times roaming the corridors and rooms. The last stop in this video is the self-proclaimed most haunted pub in all Scotland, the Banshee Labyrinth. A lot of haunted pub stories in Edinburgh are interconnected, especially the ones of South Bridge. There seem to be a lot of the same stories which happen as if ghosts were wandering to and from each area in close proximity. Due to ineffective waterproofing and overcrowding by the mid-19th century, the vaults had disintegrated into a disease-ridden slum. The area was abandoned during the late 19th century, but they were rediscovered and opened for public tours in 1997. I talked more about the South Bridge vaults in week 2's video. The Banshee Labyrinth is one of the pubs located within the South Bridge vaults. The story goes that it was once home to a wealthy tyrant, Lord Nicola Edwards, who was a strong believer of witchcraft and needlessly tortured innocent women for being witches in his own house. We may consider this as an outdated tale that could not relate to our modern world, but to this day, there has been no apology or memorial for the innocent women who were persecuted as a result of witchcraft laws. Lord Nicola Edwards was around during the reign of King James VI, which was a couple of centuries before the Southbridge vaults were built. But it's still interesting to see how the tales of hauntings are all concentrated in this area. There are rumors that Lord Edward's stance on witchcraft was very much in line with those of King James VI, and he was involved in persecution of witches, which with some accounts saying that he used his own house as a base of interrogation. With the overlap of witchcraft and the Southbridge vaults, this area really is a hot spot for paranormal activity. It is said that the ghost of a banshee haunts these parts, bewailing the cruel punishment Lord Nicola Edwards wrongly inflicted upon her. The most famous story involving the Banshee involves a construction crew during the renovations. They heard the faint sound of crying from one area. When they went to investigate, they found a girl with long black hair weeping in the corner with her face buried in her hands. They approached her and she looked up. The girl had no eyes and let out a blood-curdling scream, causing the workers to flee from the building for their lives. But that isn't even the worst part. Later in the day, they all received calls informing them someone in their families had died that afternoon. This is where the name Banshee came from. There is also allegedly a ghost called Molly, which is a young girl who has reportedly been seen there by various members of staff in public. Another story is that a coven of witches sealed a demonic force in a stone circle that is right above the section of the underground pool rooms. You can enter, but you have to leave the same way or you risk getting hurt. That concludes this week's episode of Stormy Tells Ghost Stories Haunted Edinburgh. I hope you enjoyed hearing about 3 of the most haunted locations in this very historic city: Mary King's Close, the Scotsman Hotel, and the Banshee Labyrinth. Remember to like and subscribe to my Girls Rock Productions channel. While you're here, check out some of my other playlists. I do live covers and guitar lessons on my Stormy Teaches Music playlist. The covers are Mondays at 1 p.m. Eastern, and then I teach the song I covered on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern. I also have just started the Stormy Talks True Crime playlist, where I discuss some of the most notorious and sometimes controversial true crime cases. Those new videos are posted Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. If you are ever in Wilmington, North Carolina area, sign up for the Wilmington Ghosts Walking Tour or the Wilmington Spirits and Spirits Pub Crawl with U.S. Ghost Adventures. You can have me or one of our other very talented tour guides show you around our historic downtown and hear some of the darkest stories the beautiful city on the beach has to offer. While you're visiting, if you decide that you want to stay or buy a vacation home, check out my Moving to Coastal Carolina channel and contact me, as I am a licensed realtor here in southeastern North Carolina. Don't forget to tune in tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern for next week's, well, technically this week's installment of Stormy Tells Ghost Stories Haunted Edinburgh. Until then, have a great night and stay safe.